Happy Friday. It is a Friday, and one way to know that it's Friday, if you're in the news business anyway, is this is the day politicians use for dumping bad news or releasing documents. Sometimes in a newsroom, you kind of only realize the week's winding down when you see emails flying about thousands of pages of political memos that are suddenly available. And, yes, today being Friday, the political world just got 4,000 documents newly released by the National Archives from President Clinton's 2 terms in office. It's another installment in a larger series of about 30,000 files, such as presidential notes and memos and speech drafts, which have always been withheld until now, 12 years after the Clinton administration ended. An early look doesn't suggest big problems for Clinton. We now know that he wanted to underscore how big his budget surplus was by calling it a certain kind of pocket full of cash. But hey, a big surplus can bring out the LBJ cursing in any president. So, why the delay? Well, this category of documents had been technically exempt from certain rules that would have required earlier disclosure. And if there's a rule or an exemption or a delay that presidents and their agencies can use to hold back files, even like uninteresting files, well, they often try to use it. Now imagine what a fight looks like over interesting files or incriminating files. Well, you know, that's what we often call evidence, and that is, of course, the issue facing the CIA and the Obama administration right now. Will they declassify and release documents that the Senate Intelligence Committee is seeking? There are the 9,000 documents the committee would like to get its hands on, and the intelligence agencies won't give those up. The White House so far isn't making them. Now, according to the committee, thousands of pages of secret documents are crucial to the ongoing investigation into CIA detention and so-called interrogation carried out during the Bush years. The committee also wants the CIA to stop thwarting the declassification of the Senate committee's own investigative report about the program. And yet, at the same time, we already have some of the most pivotal government memoranda on this issue. Why? Well, back in 2009, President Obama, in what was one of the first big calls he had to make as president, well, he had to decide whether or not to release some important legal memoranda that were drawn up during the Bush era that made a legal case and purported to provide legal authority for those practices that appeared to be torture. The Obama administration was actually being sued over those documents, and the files, many of them came to be known as the torture memos. In 2009, President Obama stopped the government from fighting a lawsuit and released many of those torture memos to the public. He also, importantly, discontinued their legal authority, effectively ending any protection for that kind of interrogation or torture. Now, even with redactions, the torture memos showed the Bush administration lawyers constructed a legal authorization of the practice of what amounted to torture in late 2002, a practice that was ongoing in the months and years after 9/11. The memo specifically okayed things like putting a prisoner in, quote, stress positions or slamming them against the wall and, as many remember, waterboarding. Those were some of the techniques used against detainees after 9/11. And while at first some did claim that incidents like Abu Ghraib were just rogue actions by a few bad apples, we know these actions were part of the official policy because those incriminating memos were released. At the time, the CIA had requested a legal cover there, a request that being granted, it ended with the drafting of the torture memos by senior lawyers at the Justice Department, and the rest, well, a lot of it is history. There were officials who did resist the program, who raised red flags, but ultimately, most of those people lost. And most of those programs went on. That is how the U.S. came to pursue detention and interrogation in ways that are being investigated to this day. And, well, whatever happened to those people who wrote the legal justification for the U.S. to engage in torture, who are the subject of this investigation? Have they paid a price? Well, let's look. The main lawyer at the DOJ, who drafted many of those documents, is now a law professor at the University of California at Berkeley. The guy who literally signed the memos, the Assistant Attorney General at DOJ at the time, well, he is a federal judge. Yeah, he got a promotion. White House Chief Counsel Alberto Gonzales, who's said to have signed off on the details day by day. Well, Mr. Gonzales is back in private practice. He teaches courses in, well, the Constitution and separation of powers, because irony. As for the CIA lawyers who initiated all of that authorization of torture, one of them just wrote a book about his 30 years doing legal work at the CIA. Some of the others are still at the CIA. Some are defending the aftermath of these activities during the Bush era. It's that aftermath that the Senate Intelligence Committee is still seeking to unravel. This past Tuesday, that's when we saw on the Senate floor that long, detailed, and sharply critical speech from the normally CIA-friendly chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Dianne Feinstein. She held the floor for 40 minutes, and she admonished the CIA, not just for withholding the information about enhanced interrogation from the committee, but also for literally trying to cover up these activities. She accused the CIA as going as far as illegally monitoring and spying on Congress to keep information out of the committee's hands. That's what Rachel had called death of the republic type stuff this week. She all but in name accused one CIA lawyer specifically, a lawyer who was allegedly involved in crafting the torture program, someone who is a key subject of this investigation, a guy who until today, get this, well, he was still working as the CIA lawyer in charge of coordinating with the Senate, the key word there, until, because he was effectively sidelined. Finally, this is the news today. The CIA got a new top lawyer, a post that had not had a permanent occupant for some time because of that feud between the Intelligence Committee and the CIA. Now, there's still a tooth and nail fight here to keep the investigation sealed, but like many secrets, the secrets being withheld from the public do seem closer and closer to coming to light. Will the White House and the CIA make this evidence accessible to the public? Are we any closer to holding those accountable 10 years later? Well, our next guest tried a third way to put a stop to torture when he was the top lawyer within the Defense Department at the Navy during the Bush administration. He was on the inside, and he challenged and tried to undo practices that had been justified in part by those same torture memos. Joining us now is Alberto Mora, former General Counsel of the Navy. He is now a fellow at Harvard University. Mr. Mora, an honor to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Ari.
Let's start with this report that is still, as I mentioned, classified, and the CIA, according to Senator Feinstein, is in the way of releasing the Senate report. Why would it be important to actually get that report out now?
Well, I think President Obama had it just right. He said that in discussing this week his support for the release of the document, he said that it was important to know where we had been, and it's important for it to serve us as a guide to where we're going, and he got it right on both counts.
And when you look at these tensions between the CIA and Congress, and those playing out so publicly, I want to ask you, does it have anything to do, in your view, with the fact that we have never really had a reckoning for those torture practices?
That's exactly right. The nation hasn't really yet come to grips adequately with what we did and what the consequences of those acts were. And what's more, there are a large number of American people, according to some polls, maybe 50% of the American public, that believe vaguely or generally that it may be okay to use torture in defending the country. And it's important that we understand that that would be a mistake, as it was a mistake to use torture and official cruelty during the war on terror. In making these critical decisions, we have to understand the facts of this ill-fated experiment with torture.
When we talk about separation of powers, it can sound so abstract to people, or it sounds like a constitutional law seminar. And yet what Senator Feinstein alleged here, as we've reported, is very serious, because if her allegations are true, it is the CIA potentially illegally using these tools against the very Congress that's investigating its conduct. Walk us through that combat, that pitched combat between these two branches, and contrast it, if you would, to your experience, because you were on the inside of the executive, working within the Navy, overseeing hundreds of lawyers, and yet you made some strides from within the system, pushing back against those torture memos.
The case for the concern about the CIA actions was laid out by Senator Feinstein in her 40-minute speech on the Senate floor. If you read the transcript and you watch her presentation, you saw that the Congress had reached an agreement with the CIA concerning the way that the CIA documents would be handled, and then the independence of the Senate investigators in looking at the documents and analyzing them without interference from the CIA. Senator Feinstein is alleging that the CIA broke those rules, interfered with the Senate's investigation by withdrawing documents, and then, in essence, spying on the Senate investigators who were preparing the analysis of the interrogation activities. Now, the CIA, through the person of Director John Brennan, who's also a very serious man, like Senator Feinstein is, take a different view. They say that that's not exactly what happened, and frankly, it's unclear who's got the better side of the argument yet. We need to allow the Justice Department to take a look at this and come to their own conclusions about the merits of each set of allegations. But let's remember the larger question, which is equally a constitutional question. Will we continue to use cruelty and torture as weapons of war in the defense of the United States or in offensive activities? Those are also as serious a question as whether or not Congress is able to establish and maintain a separation of powers and engage in independent oversight over executive branch activities.
And Mr. Mora, briefly, your view of the CIA Acting General Counsel making that crimes report referral to the DOJ regarding the Senate investigators?
That's also not clear. There may have been basis for, in fact, maybe even an obligation for the CIA Acting General Counsel to make that kind of report. But of course, Senator Feinstein takes a very different position. She felt that it was clear that the agreement between the CIA and the Senate was such that there was no possible allegation of criminal activity or suspicion of criminal activity on the part of Senate investigators. So again, it's one of these investigations, the outcome of which will depend upon the facts of the case, and those aren't clear yet.
Understood. Appreciate your a note of caution there on how we interpret that. Her charges being very serious, as you mentioned, and appreciate your time with all of your service and your work on these issues. Alberto Mora, former General Counsel of the Navy, thank you.
Thank you, Ari.
Absolutely. Now, back to some politics. What happens when senators who are not doctors ask leading questions of, real doctors? Amazing video of actual doctors schooling senators. You might have seen that coming, but the video is up next.